The U.S. Capitol has been called the Mirror Vatican due to the strikingly similar layout and design of its primary buildings and streets. Now, that's no accident. In fact, America's forefathers first named the capital city Rome. But the parallelism between Washington and the Vatican is most clearly illustrated by the Capitol building and dome facing the obelisk known as the Washington Monument, and at St. Peter's Square Basilica in the Vatican by a similar dome facing a familiar obelisk, both of which were, according to their own official records, fashioned after the Roman Pantheon, the circular domed rotunda dedicated to all pagan gods. Now, this layout, a domed temple facing an obelisk, is an ancient alchemical blueprint that holds significant esoteric meaning. For those who may not know, the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C. is historically based on a pagan Masonic temple theme. Thomas Jefferson, who shepherded the anti-Christian Roman Pantheon design, wrote to the Capitol's architect Benjamin Latrobe, defining it as, quote, the first temple dedicated to embellishing with Athenian taste the course of a nation looking far beyond the range of Athenian destinies, end quote. The Athenian Empire was, of course, first known as Ossyria, the kingdom of Osiris. In 1833, Massachusetts Representative Rufus Coyote agreed, writing, quote, we have built no national temples but the Capitol, end quote. Now, to understand what these statements may soon mean for the future of the world, one needs to comprehend how these apparati, the dome and the obelisk facing it, facilitate important archaic and modern protocols for invigorating prophetic supernatural alchemy. In ancient times, the obelisk represented the god Osiris's missing male organ, which Isis was not able to find after her husband brother was slain and chopped into 14 pieces by his evil brother Set. The story involves a detailed account of the envious brother and 72, that's an important number, conspirators tricking Osiris into climbing inside of a box, which Set quickly locked and threw into the Nile. Osiris drowned, and his body floated down the Nile River where it snagged on the limbs of a tamarisk tree. In Byblos, Isis recovered his body from the riverbank and took it into her care, but in her absence, Seth stole the body again, and this time chopped it into 14 pieces, which he threw back into the Nile. Isis searched the riverbank until she recovered every piece except for the genitals, which had been swallowed by a fish. Isis recombined the 13 pieces of Osiris' corpse and replaced the missing organ with a magic facsimile, an obelisk, which she used to impregnate herself during the very first raising of Osiris ceremony, in which she called forth the seed of the dead god from the underworld up through the magic device, thus giving rise to Osiris again in the person of his son, Horus. Now, this legendary ritual for reincarnating Osiris formed the core of Egyptian cosmology, as well as the Rosicrucian Masonic dying and rising myths, and was fantastically venerated on the most imposing scale throughout all of Egypt by towering obelisks representing the phallus of Osiris and domes representing the pregnant belly of Isis, including at Karnak, where the upright obelisks were vitalized or stimulated from the energy of the masturbatory sun god Ra shining down upon them. In Egypt, where rituals were performed to actually raise the spirit of Osiris into the reigning pharaoh, political authority in the form of divine kingship or theocratic statesmanship was established, later reflected in the political and religious doctrine of royal and political legitimacy, or the divine right of kings, who supposedly derived their right to rule from the will of God, with the exception, in some countries, that the king is subject to the church and to the pope. But this meant, among other things, that the Egyptian pharaoh enjoyed extraordinary authority as the son of the sun god Ra and the incarnation of the falcon god Horus during his lifetime. At death, Pharaoh would become the Osiris. the divine judge of the netherworld, and on earth his son and predecessor would take his place as the newly anointed manifestation of Horus. So each generation of pharaohs provided the gods with a spokesman for the present world and for the afterlife, while also offering the nation divinely appointed leadership. And yet the observant listener may wonder, was there something more to the pharaoh's deification than faith in ritual magic? Well, the cult center of Amun-Ra at Thebes may actually hold the answer, as it was the site of the largest religious structure ever built, the Temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak, and the location of many extraordinary, mysterious rites. The great temple, with its miles of walls and gardens, the primary object by the way of fascination and worship by the nemesis of Moses, the pharaoh of the Exodus, Ramses II, was the place where each pharaoh reconciled his divinity in the company of Amun-Ra during the festival of Opet. Now, the festival was held at the Temple of Luxor, and it included a procession of gods carried on barges up the Nile River from Karnak to the temple. The royal family would accompany the gods on boats, while the Egyptian laity would walk along the shore, calling out and making requests of the gods. But once at Luxor, the pharaoh and his entourage would enter the Holy of Holies, the Temple of Isis, the domed belly, where the ceremony to raise the spirit of Osiris into the king would be performed, the raising of Osiris ceremony, by the magicians of Egypt. And don't forget, these men were very powerful, as they were able to mimic almost all of the miracles conducted by God through the hand of Moses during the Exodus. But in any case, it was truly believed that Pharaoh at that moment would be transmogrified into a living deity, Osiris in flesh. Outside, large groups of dancers and musicians would wait anxiously, and then when the king emerged as the born-again Osiris, the crowd would erupt in gaiety. And from that day forward, the pharaoh would be considered to be, just as the god ciphered on the Great Seal of the United States will be, the son and spiritual incarnation of the supreme deity, the all-seeing eye of Horus, Apollo, Osiris, above the unfinished pyramid on the Great Seal, represents that event. Now fast forward to today, and at the inauguration of every American president, across town at the House of the Temple, the modern Egyptian magicians, the Freemasons, Scottish Rite, 33rd degree, are conducting the raising of Osiris ceremony to call the seat of Osiris Apollo from the underworld through the Washington Monument obelisk, where it magically emits into the U.S. Capitol dome, while America's new leader is standing there accepting his role as the living representative of Osiris. This is done in anticipation of the day when events are going to surpass parity, and the beast that was and is not shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition, the Greek word Apollo. And they that dwell on earth shall wonder whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not, and yet is. Revelation 17:8. For a few adepts of history and secret orders, this DC ritual is deliciously staged, as even the term inaugurate is from the Latin inauguratio, and it refers to the archaic ceremony by which the Roman augurs or soothsayers would approve